Hello and welcome to Deja View, the Ithacans Weekly Review podcast. I'm your host, Jake Leary, and I am here today with staff writer Natalie Newman for the second week in a row, and Sophia Adamucci from another podcast on this lovely, lovely network. We're going to talk about Big Mouth today, which comes with a little warning just in advance that this is going to be slightly more inappropriate than our normal show, so beware if you're a small child who is for whatever reason listening to this. And with that, Natalie, take us away.
So Big Mouth follows the lives of a group of 7th graders in their journey through puberty. Primarily we follow Nick, voiced by Nick Kroll, Andrew, voiced by John Mulaney, and their friends Missy, voiced by Jenny Slate, Jessie, voiced by Jessie Klein, and their hormone monsters, Connie and Maurice, who are voiced by Maya Rudolph and Nick Kroll again.
Just to be clear, because there's a lot happening here, the hormone monsters are those two lovely guys there, and their sole purpose is to get the kids through puberty and get them to embrace their horniness and sexuality.
And sometimes make bad decisions, which just adds to the hilarity and conflict.
A lot of times make bad decisions. This is a show about young people making the most uncomfortable bad decisions.
It's so good.
Which is, yeah, well, that's why it's so good.
Yeah.
You can look at so many things that these people do, and even if you haven't done the specifics, some of the more heinous things, you can say, oh, I get this.
Yeah, I also think it's important to say that's a animated show. We're not actually watching real children, we're watching animated children, and it gets away with a lot because that's the medium it uses. There's lots of scenes with penises all over the place and like talking vaginas, and it's just this raunchy, the raunchiest show I've ever seen, and it follows the lives of literal children, which is like the dynamic's very uncomfortable, but it's hysterical. Like, it's the funniest thing I've ever seen, I think.
Yeah, it's very close to being cringe comedy, but it's not. I think it's just because it's so relatable that it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because I don't think anybody gets through puberty unscathed, and this is a show specifically about that.
Yeah, I also think Nick Kroll and all the other creators and writers treat it with a lot of heart. Like, there's a lot of, even though it's really uncomfortable and like you said, like they're making horrible decisions most of the time, like there's still a lot of love, and we can't get mad at the characters because they're kids, they're learning. And so if it wasn't so, like, sometimes it's very heartfelt, like it'll go from the grossest thing ever to like the most heartfelt moment, and you're like, this is like emotional whiplash, but like I'm so in for the ride.
Yeah, and the last episode of this season, just to completely spoil that, is a really good example.
Yeah.
Because Jessie's arc throughout a lot of this is her slowly becoming depressed, and the end is her finally, I don't want to say embracing depression, that's the wrong word, but I guess really falling into that, and her friends go and save her from that in a very literal sense, going into an alternate dimension and saving her from a giant purple cat that represents depression.
Yeah, that scene was so creative, I thought.
Yeah, it's surprisingly the perfect platform to talk about a lot of the realities that come with puberty, and I really like how in this season they opened it up to talking about mental illness and talking about like different challenges that a lot of people, like a lot of young people do go through that are usually like taboo topics, whether it comes to like, I don't know, like female masturbation is something that they talk about a lot that's usually never talked about in mainstream media. They talk a lot about like sexuality through weird metaphors, which I enjoy.
Yeah, well, it's a really good issue show that doesn't feel like an issue show.
Yeah.
The best example of that is, I guess, midway through the season they do an episode about Planned Parenthood, which is a little anthology episode.
Yeah, and I've been reading some reviews of the show, and a lot of reviews have been like, okay, yeah, like it was a good episode, but it like totally disrupted like the flow of the season. Like, there's been a lot of criticism of that episode, but I actually thought like there's nothing wrong with a good capsule episode where you just kind of, you put the overarching plot on hold and just kind of focus on the characters. And I thought it really showed how animation like makes that episode possible, because we're in space, we're in like a horror movie, like it jumps all over the place while also being super informative. And one review I read said that like the audience who watches Big Mouth probably already supports Planned Parenthood, so even though it's kind of a risk, Planned Parenthood is like, some people are really up in arms against it, a lot of people support it, and I think, Big Mouth kind of probably knew their audience would be really supportive of an episode that fully focused on it, but it was like a love letter to Planned Parenthood, and I love Planned Parenthood, so I was like absolutely thrilled.
I agree, and also I'm a fan of bottle episodes in general, and I actually thought that putting this episode in the middle of the season was a really nice break, because I feel like we were already like building up a lot of tension in everyone's character arcs, and this was a really nice opportunity to like talk about something that really matters, especially in like today's political climate. And I feel like it's also a really good opportunity, like as with most of this show, to like reach out to maybe like a younger audience and like explain to them like what contraception is, or like what Planned Parenthood does as a whole. So I thought it was educational on top of anything else.
And it also shows that the kids, like the show sometimes makes a point of saying like the kids are smarter than the adults they're surrounded by, and that's like emphasized in this episode with Coach Steve, who just is like, I don't even know how to describe this character, also voiced by Nick Kroll. Like, this man does everything on this show, but he's just kind of an imbecile, has absolutely no sexual experience, yet he's their health teacher, which is kind of sometimes the reality in when it comes to like public school, like sex ed. And they, like the kids are the ones that know about Planned Parenthood, know about birth control, know that, how abortions work. And it's I think it's a good episode that shows that like the youth are learning, like we're a more educated generation, and sometimes like the kids know what's going, like we got to give it to the kids, like they know what's up. And I really I love how smart all these kids are, especially Jesse and Missy, which I think got to shine in the Planned Parenthood episode as well.
Yeah, and get to shine generally.
Yeah.
I think what this show does with the two of them, in a way that we'll talk about a little bit later, and we'll touch on now, is very strong and very interesting. And it's also interesting because I feel like this is a show that is from like the male perspective mostly, but in very few, like you don't feel that most of the time. And I feel like they did a good job of, I don't want to say working around that, but like acknowledging that and not making it feel like gross or overstepping their bounds.
Yeah, and I think like Maurice, the hormone monster, is like, he's the dirtiest, raunchiest, gross. Like, it's just kind of gross sometimes, the things he says and does. But it's never like, I never feel like women are like degraded at the expense of a joke, which I think shows that talk about sex and young boys going through puberty. Like, sometimes like women are the butt of the joke. And like, I think Andrew's a good example of this. Like, whenever Maurice is like, only like her because she has big boobs, and Andrew's like, that is not cool. Like, I should like a woman because like she's smart too. Like, I love how, it looks at complex issues with a lot of, with a lot of like, it just pays attention to like that like women aren't the butt of every joke when it comes to like males going through puberty.
Yeah. And when the male characters like start doing that and start objectifying people, it's always something that's discussed. Like, they're held accountable every single time. Yeah. There's a point in this season where Andrew masturbates to Nick's sister, and it's not something that's dropped. They fight about it and they talk about it, and even when Nick and Andrew make up over that, the conversation is, you can't do this. Like, you can't, this isn't something you can do, this isn't okay. Yeah. The fact that like you're admitting it doesn't make anything better. This is something that's wrong.
Yeah.
From a writer's perspective, I find it very satisfying and like reassuring that the show follows through like calling the guys out on what they're doing wrong, especially like because they're going through puberty and it's like okay for them to make mistakes, but they're calling them out on it now. And I feel like the show is really good at being self-aware, even with like their minor characters. Andrew Rannells' character, who basically in the first,
I love his character.
Him so much. In the first season though, he basically just played like this angry, like quirky gay kid who was like very, like that was his only characteristic, was that he was like angry and gay. And then they call him out on that in the second season with another gay character. So I feel like it's like already growing so much, and the character development is growing, and the writers are really good at calling themselves out on their mistakes that they're making. And it's, I don't know, I feel like on campus even, like a lot of writers aren't aware of that. So I think it's really cool that the show is doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a show about growing up, and growing up absolutely sucks. Like, I've never watched a show about children and been like, oh my God, thank God I'm an adult. Like, thank God I'm like not a carefree child. Because it shows like children are not carefree. Like, they have struggles, like we said, like mental health, sexuality, and just kind of like, yeah, with Andrew character, just figuring out like what kind of person you want to be and how you want to treat other people.
And just where you fit in was a huge thing for his character. I feel like I think in like, it was towards the second half of the season, he was like, I'm not like a guy, I don't fit in with the guys, but I'm also like not a girl. And I felt like that was something that was like, that's hardly ever touched on, like that perspective and that feeling. Yeah. And it's such a common feeling for a lot of people going through adolescence. Yeah,
first season, I remember tweeting about the sleepover episode, and I tweeted like, I just watched the Big Mouth episode, like sleepover episode, and I feel like I put my heart in a blender. And like sometimes the show really, it makes you really sad, and it's so
emotional.
Yeah, it's super emotional. And Andrew's mini arc really was like a very emotional point of the season.
Yeah, I mean, again, this show captures a lot, and I think a lot of what makes it special comes down to the way it handles those issues. And we've talked about that a lot already, but like we're going to talk about that in even more depth now. And cover some of the few things that we missed. But it is a strong example of that. And it surprised me too, because I think I watched this with you the first time, a year ago, and it didn't hit me what this show was actually about.
Did I show it to you? Oh, is that why I'm here?
Oh, that's perfect. And it's a good reason to like plug the other podcast, to secretly spoil any plan that this is supposed to represent. Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't realize what this was. And going back and
do you remember how excited I was? And like, the thing is, I don't like adult cartoons. Like, I've like never seen Family Guy, I've never seen South Park, and I love this show. Like, I'm so glad I showed it to you.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that though, because I feel like I love adult cartoons, and that's why I love this, and I feel like it also reminds me a lot of South Park. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right, we're going to move on to something else. I'm sorry to divert you away, but we're going to go in and dive a little bit deeper into some of these issues that we've touched on. We're back. We're going to talk about some of the other issues that we didn't necessarily get to because there's a lot to cover in this show. I think we're going to start with something that was introduced in the second season that wasn't touched on in the first, which is the Shame Wizard, which I know is something you're very passionate about, Natalie.
Yeah, I have a lot of mixed feelings about the Shame Wizard because I feel like his character was a really clever way to talk about shame and talk about how everyone kind of feels insecure sometimes, but I also feel like they could have done a more direct way of talking about anxiety through the Shame Wizard. Like, I feel like everything that the Shame Wizard did was make these kids like feel anxious, and like it really embodied what anxiety is. And I feel like it was kind of weird that they were on the nose about depression with the depression kitty, but they were kind of perpetuating the stigma about anxiety by not calling the Shame Wizard out on his like tendencies to provoke anxiety. So I didn't really know how that fit in.
Well, what I did like about the Shame Wizard was that like Maurice and Connie, the two hormone monsters, really like fought him and was like, leave our kids alone. Like, we are trying our hardest to get them through this, and like you are in the way. So I really love that like the hormone monsters were like sticking up for the kids in that way.
And I also liked how all of the kids could see the Shame Wizard, but they didn't know that they could all see the Shame Wizard until like the very end of the season, and they were like, oh, we're all feeling this way. But that also makes me want them to call them out on mental health and anxiety even more, because I feel like it would open up a conversation saying like we all can feel anxious and we all can feel shame, but it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us.
Yeah, well, I think Andrew is a good example of like when they actually start talking about things, he's like, I feel great, like now I want to spill all my secrets, which gets him in trouble with Nick when he tells him about the bathing suit and Nick's sister. But I think at least the show's moving towards like telling us that it's okay to start talking about things that make us uncomfortable or we're embarrassed by.
Yeah, I mean, and as with all things on this show, there's an interesting balance that it strikes, where when Andrew goes without the Shame Wizard, it's still a problem. Like, anxiety is a terrible, terrible thing, but there's a very tiny root of that that's necessary, you know, which is something that this show covers a lot. Like, you can go through puberty and be a horny child, but like you've got to be reasonable and rein that in. You know, all of this is about like some sort of control and some sort of restraint, and I think the Shame Wizard is a very interesting way of doing that.
Yeah, or even with Jessie when she's going through a really hard time with her parents' divorce, and she ends up accidentally slut-shaming Gina, another new character of the show, voiced by Gina Rodriguez, and Jessie kind of realizes like, oh, just because I'm going through a hard time isn't an excuse to like be mean to other people or to be a bad person. Like, I still have to take responsibility for my actions, which, I mean, it's still a message I think adults like need to learn. Like kids are learning these, but I think the adult viewers also could use some of these lessons.
Yeah, I felt like that was a really beautiful character arc that Jessie went through, especially in that moment. And I really liked how the Shame Wizard like visited Jessie, but also visited Gina, so you could see kind of the foil of the two and see how like Jessie felt bad for basically slut shaming Gina, but then Gina felt bad for feeling that way and feeling like she couldn't express her sexuality the same way that like a guy could, per se.
Yeah, I love the female characters in this show. I think that's also one of the reasons I love it so much and why I think it's so strong. Like Jessie, Missy, and now Gina too, who we haven't talked on.
I love Lola.
Yeah, Lola. Also voiced by Nick Kroll. Yeah,
It isn't voiced by Nick Kroll.
But all of them are super complex. Like a show about kids is giving us some of the strongest female characters out there right now. Like I love Jessie. Like I want to pull her aside and be like, listen, it's gonna be okay. Like you're gonna be like grow up and everything's gonna be fine. But like I think they handle all the female characters with so much respect, and they show how female friendship is also really important, especially with Jessie and Missy.
Yeah, I feel like especially they talked about body positivity and like body image in a really unique and like really creative way. I mean, the song from the Korean Day Spa is still stuck in my head, but I think that they also like, it was a complete arc in the sense that like they felt bad about themselves, but then they also learned that like they don't have to feel bad about themselves, and that's just like a stigma and like a perpetuation of like society, whatever you want to call it. But I thought that that was like really important, especially for like kids who are watching this, to see that, because that's something that affects, I think, all girls, and no one really thinks about it.
Well, the thing about the show is like, I wish I saw it when I was going through puberty, but like, it's not really a show for people going through puberty. It's for adults who have gone through it and can watch it and kind of, you know, like you said, we can relate to maybe not the exact actions, but the feelings the characters are experiencing. But like, I wish someone had been like, look at Jessie, like this, like she's feeling very complex feelings, like you're allowed to feel it too. And that's like, it's the show I think would benefit young people, but it's just not for young people. I think it's a little too inappropriate.
Well, unless kids get to it themselves.
Yeah.
And then they find it. But you get into the same question, are you going to be able to appreciate this thing while you're going?
Yeah, exactly. You kind of need to be out of it to think it's funny. Like, I think if you're experiencing it now, you're going to be like, this isn't funny. Like, this is how I feel, and it's awful. But yeah, this show's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's as good a note as any to end it on. I wish we had infinite more time to talk about this. There's so much that this show does right. Thank both of you for coming on today. Thank you, Natalie, for coming on for a second week in a row.
Of course.
Now's your chance to plug anything that you haven't gotten to talk about.
Just follow me on Twitter at @NatalieNew_.
And Sophia?
You can hear more of my opinions on my podcast, We Need to Talk. It comes out every Saturday on the Ithacans website, SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We talk about topics college students actually care about. That's our fun little tagline. And you can also find me at Twitter at @Adamucci_.
Yeah. And you can find me on Twitter at JD_Leary. You can listen to this show on SoundCloud, on iTunes, on Spotify. You can watch it. Please watch it. So much work goes into making this a video show. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for doing whatever it is you're doing, so long as it gets that little counter to go up higher. This has been Deja View. Thank you for watching, listening, whatever. I just went through that already.